I'm Jim Check. You're watching Kelowna Now. I'm with Gavin Dew, a newly appointed Conservative MLA.
Thank you very much.
And you got a shadow cabinet position as well.
Yes, that's right. I'm now the shadow minister or critic for jobs, economic development, and innovation, or JEDI, as they call it.
Jedi warrior.
Yeah, they call me the Blue Jedi.
Well, we could use some jobs innovation in British Columbia.
We sure could.
So how do we get small businesses feeling good about this economy again? Because I hear from lots of businesses, they're having a tough time.
Yeah, I mean, look, businesses are having a tough time, and let's zoom out for a second and let's look at where we've been. We've had 5 or 7 years under this government, where over the last 5 years there's been virtually 0% private sector job growth, while the size of government has grown by a third. For every 1 private sector job created, there's been 12 public sector jobs created, because this NDP government has been growing government employment at 3 times the rate of the rest of Canada. So, obviously everybody knows that we need a strong public service. Everybody knows that we need to have a social safety net. Everybody knows we need government and government workers, but we cannot sustain this rate of growth where we have a bigger and bigger government perched on the back of an anemic economy that's not growing and not creating jobs that support people and families.
So, in the United States, they name something that people are kind of like the public is getting behind, Doge, right? And as I've heard other countries, there was a former UK prime minister that came out and says, when do we get Doge in the UK? And then some other countries said, when do we get Doge here? A lot of people are asking, when do we get Doge in Department of Government Efficiency?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that in the American context, that obviously struck a nerve, because it was Elon Musk advancing Doge, again, Department of Government Efficiency, similar to efforts that have been taken in the past here in British Columbia around red tape reduction, or around the efficiency of the way that we deliver government.
Or accountability.
Yeah, I think it's accountability.
Just in spending taxpayer dollars.
Absolutely. It's accountability. It's efficiency. I think that there's a level of public frustration that happens when, more and more in the private sector, you see changes in the way that services are being delivered. You see changes in the expectation of how people interact with customer service. And then they look at government and they see how slow it is. So, the example that I've often provided is if you want to go and register a new company, you can go on ChatGPT and it'll help you write a business plan in a matter of hours. You can go on Netfirms or GoDaddy, secure a domain quickly. You can use generative AI, or you can use any number of different services to do branding very quickly and be up and running. But you're bottlenecked by government having to sign off on the name of your new company, which at one point was taking 26 days unless you paid to have it expedited. So you've just got this tremendous and growing contrast between the level of efficiency and innovation that people are seeing out of the private sector and the slow-moving government in relative terms. So you've got a slower-moving government, despite the fact here in British Columbia that we've increased the size of the government payroll by a third. And I think that's only going to lead to
frustration. And it actually slows down the process, because the more government you add, the more they want to feel like they're adding value and they introduce more regulation, more barriers, and more people that it has to go through. And it just becomes so bogged down.
Well, there was a NASA bureaucrat, decades ago, who came up with the term self-licking ice cream cone to describe some of that bureaucracy, where it's just bureaucracy for the sake of bureaucracy, government for the sake of government. Again, we need to make sure that we have a strong, well-running government. We obviously need people employed in government, but we've reached a point that is unsustainable, and where there has been 0 private sector job growth. So what you're going to see from myself and from my colleagues in the Conservative caucus, particularly those of us who are focused on the economic ministries, you're going to see a relentless focus on private sector job growth and on the importance of making sure we're actually seeing economic development in this province.
How do we make sure we get accountability? Because right now, even in Canada, there's that green slush fund that they won't provide the information on, that's kind of like tied up Parliament. How do we? And I know that in the past too, that the BC Liberals have said that they couldn't get the information from the NDP. How are you guys going to make sure you get that information?
I think accountability starts with having a legislature that is functioning and is in session. So if you look at what's happening right now, you have an NDP government that got elected. They got to work for just long enough to give themselves almost a $2 million pay hike in additional compensation
Added a
for
whole bunch more
every
cabinet
single member
ministers.
of their cabinet, their parliamentary secretaries. Every single member of that NDP caucus is drawing an additional salary. And yet, after saying that they were going to have a fall sitting of the legislature, there's now no fall sitting of the legislature. And there are crucial crisis level issues that are happening in this province. There are issues that arose with a tremendous degree of public concern during this election. There was a lot of big talk from Premier Eby about how he was going to hit the ground running and get down to work. And now he seems to be curled up in a ball, hiding under his desk in his office, and just not doing anything. So that's very concerning in terms of accountability.
The big one that I remember is he said, I heard you. I heard British Columbians, because, it's a very tight election. You guys have it's a very slim margin for them. He said, I heard British Columbians, but now it seems like he's deaf again.
Yeah, I'd say so. Look, my phone's been ringing, and I know every other critic has been hearing from people, stakeholders in their respective areas of coverage. We've got people calling us up and saying, this is a crisis issue. This is an issue that needs to be dealt with immediately. And by the way, we haven't heard from the new minister. We haven't heard back. We're not seeing action from this government. These folks seem to think that they can just go until February without accountability and without action. We've got issues, for example, right here in Kelowna, the NDP's sledgehammer approach to short-term rental has contributed to killing our tourism sector. Everybody knows that it's a problem, including NDP candidates who ran in this election declaring a need for a made in Kelowna solution. Everybody knows that this needs to be acted on, and it needs to be acted on quickly in order to make sure we get a tourism rebound next summer. And yet, there's not even a legislative session where we can hold the NDP to account and call on them to make these changes in time to help our struggling tourism sector here.
Yeah, I've heard from the back channels that even city council wants to do some stuff, but I know I did that with Premier Eby as well, and at first it sounded like he was going to listen, but then at the end he was like, no.
Well, and here's the deal. Look, there's a bunch of NDP cabinet ministers who are in new portfolios, but one minister who is not in a new portfolio is Ravi Kahlon, who's the Minister of Housing. So Minister Kahlon has absolutely no excuse for not knowing this file and for not acting on it very quickly to make sure that he relinquishes control and allows the city of Kelowna to move forward with its approach, that he listens to stakeholders, and that he enables tourism to get back on track here. He knows the file. He's heard from stakeholders over and over again. There's absolutely no excuse for not moving immediately on this.
Because it sounds like we're going to hit that 3% vacancy target.
Yeah.
So then there seems to be no reason to continue to use that sledgehammer.
Well, exactly. And there's, I've heard from so many stakeholders on this file, and I think people need to understand it's not just about people that own properties. It's also about the extended supply chain here, right? It's about the coffee shop that benefits from having tourism. It's about the wineries that were, you could
traveling
shoot
nurses, traveling doctors.
Yeah, you could shoot
on and on and on.
Absolutely,
right?
You could shoot a cannon through a lot of wineries this summer. Plus, you've also got the handymen, the electricians, the pool technicians, the cleaners, all the people that are part of the extended supply chain there. And of course, the impact on tourism. So we've had a really, really tough year in terms of tourism. We need that rebound back, and we need government to be responsive to what's actually happening in this community rather than continuing with their top-down policies that don't make sense for us here.
I think with the political climate changing in the United States, we need government that is sharp, that is ready to react and ready to. I think the Americans are really saying that they're going into a golden age. We sure want to be part of that, not the other end of the stick of that, right?
Yeah, we want to benefit from if there's economic success happening in the States, we want to benefit from that, not be the losers in that context. We're obviously seeing some pretty big, bold statements being made by President Trump around tariffs. And we're going to have to figure out how we deal with that situation. Again, the Premier's been pretty non-responsive and has just put out some empty tweets about that.
British Columbia plays a big role in that because we have the seaport, right?
Yep.
Like our seaport, and they know it's on the other side of Montreal and stuff like that. But British Columbia is part of the immigration, especially the fentanyl crisis, right? So.
Yeah, it's a catastrophic issue, and there is a federal dimension and a provincial dimension in terms of that. Particularly port enforcement. There's an RCMP role. I won't get into all the levels of government there, but what's important for folks to understand is that drug gangs respond to economic incentives too. they make investments on a risk-adjusted basis. So when you have a very porous port or border, then folks that are trying to move drugs are going to move them there because the likelihood of seizure, the likelihood of losing people to arrest, the likelihood of losing their investment is lower. So we've basically got conditions where people are choosing to move drugs through our ports because we've made it easy for them.
And then we had that big drug bust in Falkland. I mean, we've had massive operations like that set up in our communities.
Yeah, absolutely, and that obviously has really serious effects in terms of the people and families that are affected by that. It contributes to what we're dealing with in terms of the overlapping addiction and mental health and homelessness crisis, and it also funds organized crime. So we've got to crack down on that.
So the Americans have said, Tom, the new ICE guy, has said that more people have been killed by fentanyl and opioids than by terrorism in a number of years. And they said what the United States is going to do is they're going to label these traffickers in these drugs as terrorists and go after them with those laws.
Good.
I mean, enough people have died. Like I can't remember, I think 150,000.
Yeah, we've got to get serious about this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we need to fix this, right? We need to plug the holes for sure, right? And what I did listen to a Global interview, and a former minister said that like Trump's threats here may be good. We actually have to take a hard look at our borders.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what he's obviously, he tends to posture and that he can be transactional in terms of his negotiating style. But I think that the flurry of stories that are happening around this are drawing attention to a crucial issue. Like it's creating a burning platform where one is needed. It shouldn't take the threat of tariffs to galvanize everyone into action to be much more aggressive around areas like port and border enforcement and the movement of drugs. But if it does galvanize a really serious conversation and it starts creating incentives toward better action on that front, then that's a healthy conversation.
So David Eby couldn't convince any conservative to take the speaker role?
Evidently not.
Not like last time where actually BC United or BC Liberal crossed the floor to take that job?
No, it looks as if they'll be continuing with Raj Chauhan.
And the Green Party could take that role.
Well, I mean, why would the Green Party trust the NDP when they stabbed them in the back last time? So
well, also they have more power, I think, this way.
Yeah, fair. Dealing with things on an issue-to-issue basis definitely will increase their leverage. When the NDP got to 47 seats as a result of Surrey, Guildford flipping in the final count, that meant that they would be less dependent on the Greens, albeit they'll still be a very fragile government. They've, part of the reason why there will now be no sitting this fall is that they've chosen to continue with Raj Chauhan as the speaker. My personal view is that they're avoiding accountability. I think a lot of them are already scheduling long vacations because they feel as if they've earned it. We are taking the opposite approach. What you're going to see is our critics are actively out there meeting with stakeholders in their portfolios. We're going in doing the work while the NDP is clearly not doing the work, not allowing themselves to be held accountable. So I think what you're going to see over the next months and years, if their government lasts that long, is that we're going to prosecute. We're going to try to be a very effective opposition. We're going to try to demonstrate that we're a government in waiting. And for folks like myself that are focused in economic portfolios like jobs, economic development, and innovation, you're going to hear an unrelenting focus on private sector job creation and economic growth, which is dramatically overdue in this province.
Yeah, I mean, the government sector has grown, and you can see why the Liberals and NDP seem to want to grow government because that's, basically that's a voter for them as well.
It's just not sustainable economically, though. You cannot create a situation where you can't build an economy on the back of public sector employment alone. Obviously, it's important. Obviously, we have respect for people that work in government, but it is just not economically sustainable to continue only growing the public sector and not creating private sector job growth. And there's just so many of these policies that this government has brought in that have created uncertainty. They've created decline. They've created red tape. They've made it harder and harder for people to want to invest in this province. And we're also losing a generation of young people, and in particular, young innovators and entrepreneurs who are leaving to go pursue success elsewhere. And if we lose those people, that next generation of job creators, then that is going to set us up for a really tough couple of decades ahead.
The tech sector is so important, especially going forward with AI and all those things. And tough slugging in BC, I've ever heard from some of the people in the tech industry. and especially with what the federal government's doing with capital gains tax and all that stuff. Like it's becoming harder and harder and harder to kind of like build a case to build a tech company in British Columbia or Canada for that matter.
Look, one of my best friends just moved to Alberta, and it for reasons to do with housing, taxes, safety. So there's the direct tech element, but there's also just all those other pieces. What I've seen a lot of tech companies struggling with is that it's very difficult to employ entry-level workers because the cost of living makes it difficult for them to afford to live on the wages that a tech company can realistically pay. And then when you're talking about highly skilled, higher paid workers, well, they don't want to live in British Columbia and pay the high tax burden. So you're really stuck in a difficult position where, frankly, you look at Alberta and there's a can-do attitude. They've got Alberta Innovates has 10 times the budget of Innovate BC and a much broader mandate to focus on tech implementation across other sectors. You go there and it is a markedly different experience. So we really need to bring back a can-do attitude and try to create conditions for investment and success here.
So it's been said by some people that the NDP and the Liberals are more of a distribution type government where they want to take away money from people and then distribute it in small amounts. Whereas, like a government like what Trump's saying is it's a more of like a capital government where they want people to invest and build businesses and build things. How do we get a more capital growth kind of like feeling back in British Columbia with all those headwinds that you're talking about?
Get a new government.
Yeah.
Simple as that, right? Look, I think the contrast you're drawing is between an approach that's focused on dividing the pie or an approach that's focused on growing the pie. I'm a grow the pie kind of guy, right? And as a party, the Conservative Party of British Columbia is more focused on how can we create opportunity, how can we create success. It's based on the recognition that the best social programming is a job. It's based on the recognition that if we want to have a strong social support safety net for folks who are struggling, well, we've got to be able to pay for it. And the only way that we can pay for it is if we generate more wealth. The only way we generate more wealth is if we get more investment, create more private sector jobs, and grow the tax base rather than constantly driving up the tax rate to the point that we actually end up losing people.
So you guys don't have a lot of communication right now with the NDP government, I take it?
We have your standard level of basic communication around when the House might eventually convene. But, one of the most important...
So stuff just reading the comments on X, I guess, the posts?
Yeah, we're learning what we're doing from X. There's a reason why the legislature exists. There's a reason why we have this thing called question period in the legislature, and it is there so that the opposition is able to hold the government to account and able to call for accountability and, frankly, able to put forward better alternatives, better solutions. So this government obviously is either too lazy or too afraid to convene the legislature. I think that they have a serious issue in terms of weak leadership, weak cabinet, weak caucus, and they're afraid to get into question period. They're afraid to be held to account. They're, frankly, cowering. And I think that they should call the legislature as soon as possible. We should get in there. We should have some serious conversations. And quite honestly, if they're not up to the task of being a government and being held to account, then, David Eby can always go and see lieutenant governor.
Yeah. Everybody wants accountability. It seems that's why Doge is so popular in the States. It's he's got a sense of humor, but I think most people want accountability. They work hard for their money and then they give it in to taxes, and then they want to make sure that money's not wasted, right?
People want to make sure that their money is well spent. They want to make sure that the tax burden that they're enduring on themselves or their business is justifiable. And I think you have to have accountability. And again, when you look at what we've seen with this NDP government, what you have is higher and higher taxes. You have a higher and higher level of growth in terms of public sector employment. You have a flatline private sector economy, and you have no demonstrable plan in terms of how these folks are actually going to make things better. So I think it is going to be incumbent on them, especially having been almost defeated in this election. They really need to turn the corner and start governing very differently in a way that's more accountable, in a way that's more open, and with a really clear focus on economic growth. And if they can't do that, I don't think this government's going to last long.
Can we count on the Conservatives to be accountable?
Absolutely.
Can we count on more openness towards the media?
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that's coming. I know that a lot of our folks are going through the process of media training, becoming more comfortable as communicators, getting up to speed on all of their
Well, you're
files.
good at it, so we can expect you here more often.
Sure, and I'm
Yeah.
always happy
Look
to
at that,
speak
get you
with
on
media.
camera saying this, right?
Look, I'm always happy to speak with media,
Yeah.
but it's also really important that folks get to know the entirety of our team.
Yeah,
We've got
I
a
agree.
really, really strong team of critics, and I think that people are going to be, very impressed. Especially, we've been starting to work together in terms of the group of economic critics that are focused on different, dirt ministries, economic ministries, and I think you're going to see a really clear, coherent focus, as I said before, on private sector job growth as one of the main things that
Yeah.
we're talking about all the
Tourism,
time.
job growth, and of course, wildfires and forestry are big ones, right? Like we definitely, and if you could set me up with somebody with the shadow minister for forestry, I mean,
Yeah,
that's
Ward
such an
Stamer,
important
who's our
issue.
forest critic, is really knowledgeable on the file. And I think, going back to accountability, Ward Stamer, who I mentioned, who's our forestry critic, is really experienced, mayor of Barrier, deep background in the forestry sector. And he's going to be acting as critic for Ravi Parmar, who is a first-time minister with zero experience in forestry, zero experience in the private sector. And that's the caliber of minister they're putting forward. We've been getting phone calls from folks in industry saying, okay, so who's this new minister that we've never heard of? Has the minister of mining ever been to a mine? So I think that we have, unfortunately, for the people of British Columbia, what we have is a re-elected NDP government that lost a ton of experienced cabinet ministers to retirements, then lost a bunch more cabinet ministers to defeat in the election. So David Eby is going to try to govern with a very, very weak bench of ministers, and I think it's going to make our job easier because we'll be running circles around these folks, but it's not necessarily good for the people of British Columbia because the governance of some very, very important areas of industry in particular, where we desperately need success and need private sector job growth, is being left to people that don't know the first thing about business.
Anything you want to add?
Just that I'm really, really excited about what the next few months looks like. When John Rustad, called around asking, what critic role would you like to take on? My first choice was jobs, economic development, and innovation. Coming out of the private sector, coming out of working both in the resource sector and in the tech sector, I was really excited at the opportunity to take on this portfolio. The first week has been just fantastic, getting off to a strong start, meeting with a lot of people, starting conversations with individual businesses, industry associations, post-secondary institutions, the whole range of folks that are affected by that ministry. So I'm just really, really excited to get down to work.
Awesome. And
Hey.
we thank you for coming in today.
Thanks so much for having me, Jim.
And we thank you for watching KelownaNow.
We don't just report the news, we live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. KelownaNow, local, independent. News you can trust.